All right, this is episode 9. Welcome to B&A Panorama podcast. We have on today Marty Riske. He is a libertarian. He is also an entrepreneur, and of course, just like I said, a Liberty ambassador. Thank you for coming on today, Marty.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from?
I am from Grafton, North Dakota. And I have a weird story about that. We moved from Stephen Avenue to Manville Avenue when I was 14 years old. And my dad had two sisters. One of them lived in Stephen, Minnesota, and the other one lived in Manville, North Dakota. So yeah, it's one of those Ouija board kind of dealies, you know.
So how'd you get your way? Where did you move from there after, let's say, post high school?
Okay, finished high school in Grafton in '65. And went to UND for 4.5 years. And before I finished my half year, I went into Vista for a year, volunteers and service to America. It's a branch of AmeriCorps now. And spent a year and some months in Columbus, Ohio.
Wow. Okay. What'd you do in Ohio?
I was the only white guy in the office I worked in. There were 13 blacks working there, and it was in a black community. And I learned a lot there. That's when I became more conscious of what government spends. We got to the end of the fiscal year in March, and we had about 13,000 in the bank. And the field coordinator, the head of the center, said, we have to spend that money. If we don't spend that money, then they'll think we don't need as much money. We have to show that we're really kind of low on money so that what we ask for will be granted. And we had a thinking session one night trying to come up with what we could buy. And we ended up buying more of what we already had a warehouse full of: typewriters, desks, chairs, paper, reams of paper, because that looked, legit, and we'd spent that much before. So we took another load of that and spent our dough, and then we asked for 10% more. And I said, well, why are we asking for more when we had trouble spending what we had last year? And he said, well, if you don't ask for more, they might think you don't need as much as you got. So everything we do, we try to show that we need what we're getting to make sure that we get it, which is in deep contrast to being responsible with money and, being careful with it. And so that's when I started looking at what it meant for government to be out there doing jobs versus what I had learned having jobs while I was in high school and working for myself. I started working for myself when I was 9, hauling potatoes in a wagon. We lived right across the street from a railroad track. And so they'd carry 100-pound bags into the cars and stack them up in there. And every once in a while, a potato would fall, or the guys would like me and squeeze one out for me. Mm-hmm. And I'd sell a wagon load of potatoes to Mrs. O'Connell for 50 cents. I also did that with wood. So I had a sense of, the value of money when I went there. And I was shocked that was the method that the government works on. But when you consider government and everything that it does, that's exactly how they spend it. They have a budget, and they want to spend the money, and they want more.
That reminds me of The Office, the TV show The Office. They have a certain budget, and it's the end of the fiscal year where they have to spend it. And Michael's faced with a dilemma. He has to either spend it or cut the funding. So he ends up just buying was a printer or a chair. It's like the same thing. So
Yep, same thing. Yeah, it's quite a lot different than the profit and loss outcome of an entrepreneurial event.
Do you think for sure.
I was going to say, do you think that seeing the way that the money is being spent in that entrepreneurial way, do you think that kind of shaped how you kind of became an advocate for liberty, the way that the government was spending the money?
That definitely had an impact on me. There were two things that had a huge impact on me at the time. Number one, I was dodging the possibility of going to Vietnam and killing people I didn't know for a reason that I didn't believe in. And I'd already gone to the library because I I was called in for a physical, and they give you a test at the physical. And the guy said, you know, you could start out as a lieutenant if you wanted to. And I thought, gee, that's kind of appealing. You know, I wouldn't mind that. My dad had been in the Air Force during World War II, and you know, we were patriotic, and I was a Democrat. My dad was a Democrat. My mom was whatever my dad said, and so that was our household. And so then I went and looked up Vietnam to see, you know, what was going on there and where it was and all that stuff. And that's when I found out that Vietnam, both North and South Vietnam, were smaller than Kentucky. And I just went, well, wow, that doesn't seem fair. You know, here's this Goliath just going over there and bombing the shit out of them. And I just thought, you know, I don't want to do that. And the alternatives were so bleak. You know, one was to run to Canada. Well, I didn't want to go to Canada. And the other, I had two friends that filed conscientious objector status, and they had to serve 2 years at, both of them went to Jamestown State Hospital and got involved in counseling, which, you know, I thought about that too. But I decided to do Vista instead and put the war off for a year. And while I was in Vista, they went to the lottery system because there were an inordinate number of blacks being killed in the war. And there were an inordinate number of whites that were escaping the possibility of a draft, either through political influence. I had friends whose fathers were active in politics in Walsh County, and they got medical deferments. And so they, you know, they didn't have to go. And so kind of like Donald Trump, you know, and well, all those guys, all the guys in the Pentagon that are non-elected bureaucrats, a lot of them are, you know, Dick Cheney, he was elected to the House of Representatives and the VP, but you know, he got out with some kind of medical deferment. Most of those guys don't personally go there. You know, I could document that for anybody that's interested and look it up but it's easy to find too. Anyway, so yeah, I think between seeing the profligate spending and the war on a small people in a distant country, I just thought, this is out of whack. And I started looking around and trying to decide what. And then one day I was at an economics conference in New Orleans. I think it was 1982. And they had the world's smallest quiz there by the Advocates for Self-Government. And they had a booth there. And I thought, well, I'll take that quiz. You know, I've got a few minutes. So I took it. And the gal says, wow, we don't see very many of you. And I said, why? What did it say? And she said, you're 100% libertarian. And I had no idea, you know, I just fell on me. And so I started studying that. And as I've studied over the years, I'm absolutely convinced that the one phrase that really turned my head on libertarianism was from Lord Acton, when he said, you can only have liberty if there is virtue. And so I looked at virtue as a voluntary behavior. I wish I'd fell into more of that vein right away than studying the structure of politics and so forth instead, because up until then I really didn't know much about it. I majored in journalism, minored in English, so I just didn't really know about the structure that much. And so mostly that's what we studied at first.
So I gathered that you have an entrepreneurial spirit since you were just a kid. So how would you describe that spirit, or what is like your mindset coming into that?
Into being an entrepreneur? One of the, I'm deeply curious. I have a strong focus on customer or client. And so I can build structures to please people, and I can develop systems for people to please people. That's where my role comes in as a manager.
Okay.
And because that's really a critical component. You know, those who do not satisfy clients just don't last long. You know, it's a high risk situation for them.
Do you have any advice that you would give to, let's say, kids, 20 years old to 24, of what they should maybe do? Or if you could do like a startup, or what would be your advice for the first step somebody should take?
And that's a great age range because it's typically before you're married and have children, because that does affect starting up later. In fact, I delayed getting married because when we started out, I didn't have any money. In fact, my boyhood home on Stephen Avenue in Grafton is torn down. It was just turned into it was ultimately a slum. But yeah, at 20 to 24, I was 24. My partner was 20 when we started. So that's interesting that you picked that range. He was still in college. And he read about waterbeds in Rolling Stone magazine. And I was living out in San Francisco, and that's where the inventor was. And so he came out to visit me with his girlfriend, and we went to visit the inventor and the guy that was making the bags. And long story short, we got in the waterbed business out of a house that we both lived in when we were going to school. So yeah, I had one pair of shoes and a couple of, yeah. In fact, when I teach an entrepreneurial class at college, I'll say I was so broke that I had to quit eating, and 6 weeks later, I even had to quit smoking.
Wow. Yeah. From a young age, like growing up, how did you end up finding yourself then, from kind of, having to stop smoking and having to stop doing all that? What was the big thing that kind of brought you to an entrepreneurial powerhouse, or I guess start like feeling like you're kind of securing the bag and a little bit more comfortable?
I would say, we had the waterbed thing just took off. And we had tremendous cash flow problems. Every dollar that came in, we already had allocated to go for more products or more services or whatever that associated with the business. But we did end up with 6 stores around the state. And, those first years were really tough, but right around, I would say about 3 to 4 years later, it sort of tipped over and the cash flow started turning positive. And so we were able to buy homes and in fact, we did buy a house right away. It was about a year and a half later, we bought a duplex, just to get ourselves living in a place where we had a set fee and, rents couldn't go up. And plus we were building equity. So we did things like that. And I would say that the other thing is that we were cautious in our spending. I'm a strong believer in incremental growth. That's another thing that I train newbies that want to start out is, unlike government, which, they'll say, we're going to do this and we're going to allocate $10 billion. Okay. So they just drop that pile on the laps of people. And I can guarantee you that there's a considerable amount of waste in that amount of money doing it that way. The way the capitalist does it, especially if you don't have access to loans, is you very carefully parcel the money out to its best use, which will turn around fastest. And so you're wasting the least. You're making sure the lights are shut off. You're making sure you have the lowest cost of power and all of these things. And so your footprint is a much smaller than a government footprint, which is, there's no bigger footprint than dropping 26,000 bombs on Iraq and Afghanistan in 1 year. I mean, that's a giant pollutive footprint right there that
Record
dwarfs
amounts.
anybody else.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't talk about that either. It seems to be something that
It's out of the news. It's out of the
yeah.
news. Back when we resisted the Vietnam War, I invite everybody to Google this, or not Google, YouTube, excuse me. The 1968 Democratic Massacre, when there were people objecting to the Vietnam War outside the convention, and the Chicago police came and just beat the hell out of them with batons and threw them in vans. And Mayor Daley had been the longtime mayor of Chicago, and one of the principals in the Democratic Party stood up at the podium and called him a Gestapo. Stop this Gestapo treatment outside. and he got a big applause. It was Bloody Sunday there. It was really terrible, and you can see it on video right there if you go to that site.
I feel as if entrepreneurs and people that are able to pull themselves up in the bootstraps are okay with taking risk, whereas the majority of people are okay with just going through the average, go graduate high school, go to college, get a job, have a family, die. There's not much risk necessarily to that, and so especially when you don't have you don't have to take out big loans or anything when you can't really. So it's interesting you say incremental growth because it does happen one day at a time.
It does. That's the whole gig. And the other thing too is that college, we're going to find out here. I believe that the whole narrative about you got to go to college is over. That there's going to be a big swing toward trade schools and apprenticeships, and that's going to save thousands and thousands of dollars for people that shouldn't have spent that money to go to school. That's the tragedy of our school debt at 1.7 trillion, is that possibly as much as $1 trillion or more was wasted. That the people who borrowed that money to go to school either didn't finish, or like me, I went into college because the guidance counselor said you should go. You could do well there. And but I didn't know what I wanted to do. I picked UND because my closest friends were going there. My best friend was going there, and it was close to home. And yeah, I just thought, well, this is a no-brainer. I started out in social work. Then I went into sociology, and then I decided I didn't want to be a teacher. So I waved it in between, changed majors, and didn't really know. Really, the smart thing to do: go out and work. See what kind of work you like, and if you can take college and enhance your position later, then go ahead and do that later. But it's a big risk to go from 18 and knowing almost nothing about yourself into a major commitment for 4 years that's going to cost as much as tens of thousands of dollars. Wow, that's a big risk to take on. Not a lot of knowledge.
Yeah, with COVID, I was going to say a lot of kids and a lot of friends that I've had, they all went for 1 year. And then as soon as COVID hit, they kind of started realizing that if they couldn't work a job and this amount of debt they were taking on, there was no point in going to college. So a bunch of kids started taking an off year, and they all started to kind of digress more to trade schools or smaller colleges for the same education, but just a degree that's a little bit different. And so I think right now with COVID, especially, we're seeing a huge transition from everyone thinking they have to go to college into thinking, well, if I'm going to get the same diploma with more, it's going to cost more to go to school, and we're not going to get as good of an education because it's all online, then why go at all? And I think right now we're seeing a big kind of overhaul and everyone kind of realizing that it's kind of a scam to go right away and not know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, there's that. And then the other thing too is that, if your college is online, then you might as well go to Khan Academy for nothing, and have the best professors. I tested them out right away when they came out. I said, I just did a terrible job in algebra, and we had a football coach that was the teacher, and he obviously did not want to be teaching that subject, and so I didn't really get it. And I went on to Khan Academy, and I took Algebra 101, and I got it right away. There's the prof, and he's excellent. And he says, okay, here's how it works, and I just go, oh, okay, I can do that, So, or I want to go to Harvard, if you got to go online, well, then pick, something that's going to have some when you take out your diploma and show it off, they go, wow, so I don't know. I think it's going to really change radically, and maybe even move away from degrees to more credits. I could do some of this bookkeeping for this company because I've got 3 or 6 credits in elementary bookkeeping, and I can do data entry, and stuff like that. I took typing, stuff like that. So keyboarding, they call it now. So maybe that's all you need. You go in for 9 hours and you're done. Now you've enhanced they're paying you more, and you've broadened your perspective. So I think things are going to, that's the libertarian way, more choices, right?
Mhm.
That's
Exactly.
the whole
All the
deal
way.
of capitalism and libertarianism is more choices. The more choices, the better.
Speaking of college kids and choices, well, let's look at the stock market here this last week. It's kind of insanity a little bit, wasn't it?
Yeah, and there's some warnings out there for the people that participated, because there's a couple of adages in broking and in stock, playing with the stock market. One is, and this is a good one that I should pay more attention to, especially right now, is cut your losses short and let your profits run. So that story is that you buy at the right time when the stock is down in price, and you set a sell stop underneath it, and you decide beforehand how much you're willing to lose on the prospect of the outcome of that company, because you might be wrong, and you might even be right, but the market's going to call you wrong. So you go in with, let's say you want to lose 10% from your purchase price. Okay, you're buying something for $1,000. I'm willing to lose $100 on this investment, and you set your sell stop at 900 for whatever you bought. And if it goes down that much, then you're out and you're looking for your next theory or whatever you're going to invest in. The other one is, may your first time investing not be successful. And there's quite a few of these guys that got into that GameStop deal that are making wild money, and that's going to be in their blood now. They're going to have it in their head.
Mhm.
And like Rick Ackerman and some of these other guys that I read that are technicians, they say that it's even likely that a guy that won big in GameStop will buy the last time at the top, just believing he's going to, okay, it's down slightly here, I'm jumping in, and lose everything and possibly a lot more. That's what happened to Jesse Livermore. He was a legendary investor in the 1920s and made millions of dollars. Back then, a dollar 90 cents would buy a brand new pair of shoes. So $1 million was a lot of money. And he ended up losing everything. After the market crashed, he bought back in, lost it all. And end of story. So that's going to happen to a lot of those guys, the Robinhood guys. They're not going to change the shorting event. Shorting comes from back in the day when stocks actually were handled, and they would put ownership of a stock into a box. And if 100% of the stocks were in place, 20 to 30% would trade on an average day. So they could take 20 or 30% and sell it, short it, and it wouldn't be missed, because if the market did go down and the shorts made money, they'd sell, and the stocks could be replaced. So that's where that word shorting came from, is shorting the box. And it plays a vital role in the marketplace. You really have to have it. Any market that does not have shorting does not do well. It stays in a bear market, because what happens is you're selling the stock now when the price is at, let's say, $100. Okay. And when the stock falls to $5, that short is the only buyer. So to turn his money in, he has to buy the stock back at $5. He's already got the 100. You see what I'm saying? When he
I
sold
gotcha.
it short,
Yep.
he got the 100. So now he's looking for a way to get out at the lowest price possible. And he's the buyer at the bottom. If you don't have shorts with buyers at the bottom, the market stays there, because nobody wants to buy it. See what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's the elemental strong piece that's played there by the shorts. And so it's got to stay in. They're not going to get rid of that. Where the danger is, for example, now the big word is silver. We're going to go silver, so many shorts on silver. And those guys should be taught a lesson, because we don't know who they are, but they've been playing games with gold and silver for a long time, and everybody'd like to give them a good slap. But what happened with the Hunt brothers when they cornered the silver market back in I think it was the late 70s or early 80s, I think. They invested millions and bought it all up. And at the end, COMEX, the trading, the public trading place where it's traded as a commodity, they raised the margin up so high that there were only, and by that I mean you had to have so much money put in cash before you could buy any. They kept raising the cash levels so high that the only people who could buy it were Eastman Kodak, and they used it in film, and the Hunt brothers. Everybody else they couldn't put up that much money to buy anymore. So the market just fell like a pancake and they got destroyed.
It's interesting that you bring up people getting kind of big heads from winning first. I'm going to be honest here. I invested in a cryptocurrency called Doge, and
Okay.
I did pretty well. I did pretty well because I did it before everybody went into it. So I'm going to try and keep that in mind and not get too confident here. And
well, don't get too, don't be a pig, or let's see. It's pigs make money, hogs get slaughtered. Don't be a hog. Okay. I was standing at the urinal one day with this guy, and he says, "Oh, I'm so pissed today." And I said, "How come?" He says, "Well, I sold 5,000 shares of this stock, and I made 20 grand, but now if I'd have kept it till now, I'd have made 100 grand. Don't be like that. You made 20 G's, how much do you want to make? The moon and the stars. I mean, it's just, and when people get unrealistic like that and start thinking like that, they stay in too long and then they get burned.
Well,
Yeah.
I fortunately pulled before it got crazy because me and Brandon were both talking about that. Like, you know what? There's going to be other people thinking the exact same thing as we are, so we're just going to get ahead of the ball. So,
Yeah.
It's a great idea. Great idea.
So
Yeah.
speaking of the short sellers and, the little guy kind of fighting back, do you think that this right now with GameStop and AMC, is it sort of a form of class warfare that's going on right now? Like, do you think the little guy is trying to fight back, and who do you think is going to really win it at this point?
The hedge fund managers, first of all of them are geniuses. Okay. And so that's who you're doing battle with. So when you go in there, if you play chess once a year and you're going in to play a guy that can play 3D chess, you might win a game by luck or accident sometimes, but no, over time, you're going to lose is what's going to happen against those guys, because they're smart guys. They're not going to take this sitting down. They'll play that game too, and they'll get you out.
well, they got advantage. Yeah,
Mhm.
they got advantage to change the rules too.
Yeah.
And they can do that. I'm sure they're rattling the cage right now, trying to get some rule change that we need to protect these young bucks from, getting too much damage. We better raise how much money they got to put in, to make an investment. They might do something like that. Yeah, that's how those kinds of laws appear. Is you can bet that every decision, Franklin Roosevelt said it best: nothing that happens in Washington happens by accident. Everything is planned. And when you hear something and they say, "Oh, all of a sudden this," and no, it isn't all of a sudden. They were ready for an all of a sudden. And here it is, like Patriot Act. That was written well before, 1,100 pages, and they got it like a few days after 9/11. And they had to hurry up and pass it. Don't even read it. We got to vote on this right away to protect our country. So, yeah. So, they're ready for what. So they've got something ready for this. They'll figure something out, or have already, and they'll just put it in place if there really needs to be anything. And again, looking at it from a libertarian standpoint, I don't think so, because these smart guys are going to clean their clocks. That's what's going to happen. I've seen it over and over again.
How do you
Yeah.
think, or what way would that? I guess how do you think
they can buy options that will require you to take delivery. That's what happened with oil when it spiked up over a year ago. Maybe it was 2 years ago now. The people who had the calls, the reason it fell to zero is that the people who had call options that they purchased to buy it in the future didn't get it. The market happened before they could get them sold. And so now they had to buy it at the call price that they bought the option at. And they're not even in the oil business. Now they got to call people they've never talked to that own tankers and trucks and storage facilities. And and of course they all, okay, we'll take that on for twice the price, and they got horribly fleeced. So be careful out there. Yeah, be careful, because there's clever people out there waiting for you.
Yeah, even now, I mean, they've already put regulations in place all over like Robinhood. They made it so you could only go at closing positions, so people could only sell, limiting the amount you could buy. They changed the validation period to a week now, so you can't get into the market before a week, so that way no one can flood the market. And they're putting all these restrictions in to make sure that no one can continue to buy, to scare people to start selling. And it worked for a little bit, but the internet's kind of rallying around holding. That's the big thing. Like if you see the memes on Twitter, everyone's saying, hold the line, like don't sell. Like there's a lot of that going around.
Okay, and here's this is a perfect illustration. Okay, when they start limiting the market, that means you will lose. They're setting it up for you to lose, because here's the deal. Stephen Cohen, that guy that lost, I don't know what, 2.1 billion or something, a big hedge fund manager. I think he's worth 10 billion, just himself. Those guys, so the government comes in, okay, you have to hold it for a week. Well, they have no problem with that. I mean, it's just like nothing. They're not gonna skip a meal. But the guy that has $1,000 and he's got all of it riding on GameStop, no, he's probably going to end up with zero, or even worse, in debt. I know a guy in Fargo whose dad was at US Bank, and the guy was playing hogs on the commodities exchange, and he had a couple of really good trades. He thought, okay, I'm cool, and I'm so sure of this one investment that I'm not going to put a stop under it. And he bought it, and he left town. And in the interim, it went all to hell, and they couldn't get a hold of him. He was there was no cell phones back then, and he was going to Hawaii on vacation. Went on vacation. That's how sure he was that he was going to win this bet. And yeah, he had to sell land that he inherited. It absolutely wiped him out. Yeah, he lost a lot of money.
Be careful out there. Be careful.
You got to be careful. You got to be careful. They're waiting in the weeds. Yeah.
There's tons of stories right now. I saw one that a kid, without his parents' permission, put a mortgage down on their house and took all the money and put it in GameStop. And he made a bunch of money back, but I can't imagine the other thousands of poor souls that did the same thing and flopped for them. And
I have a hard time believing that he put a mortgage on his parents' house, because that is an involved situation. But I can see, like, for example, you let your kid in on your checkbook.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I know people that do that. I'd never do that. That's no. You got to control that. So anyway, the message is be really, really careful here. And the other thing too is you can go to stockcharts.com and enroll in their classes and learn how to read charts. Are you guys reading charts?
You know what? I need to do that.
One thing that I taught myself, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, before I buy a stock, I study the chart, and I try to buy when it's in the down mode rather than up mode. One of the things that makes this investing really difficult is that when you see the price start to move, or it's moving, or it's already gone up a bunch, you just I want to get on that. Look at it go up. No. Look for it to go down. Look for it to go on sale. It's like when you see that shirt for $100, you really like that shirt, but it's $100. Wait till July when it's on sale and buy it at half off. Yeah, don't jump those gravy train things, because they can win. Bitcoin, look at that thing. People buy in at 30 grand and it slams down to 22 and, they're upside down on the thing. Wow, that's a wild ride. If you don't wait for that 22, you could get your clock cleaned real easy.
And then people get nervous and they pull out when they're down too. And then sometimes they go back, it bounces back too. So there's this balance of how much loss can I take? And am I betting on it going back up, whether I should sell or not, sell my losses?
The thing that I've seen over and over again is the sometime investor. He's got a full-time job or he's doing something else that he really loves or something like that. But he's in the market, he's got some money to play with, or he wants to make some money on his money. And he doesn't set a stop limit. I'm going to hold these forever. Okay. Then the stock market starts to go down in earnest and it drops 40, 50%. And the thinking then is, okay, how much do I want to end up with here? How much can I I absolutely have to have this much money. And when it hits that, they sell. And I know people that in the last big downturn sold. One guy lost 71,000. He decided he had to have 20 left. And so he sold at 20,000 and then it went back up to 50 and then it's been climbing ever since. So yeah, and he's walking around with a big regret chip. It can really impact your life. So you have to be really, really careful. What can I truly afford here? And let me study the past performance of this stock when there was a major downturn. Did this stock act the same way as the other ones? And how fast did it recover after it did go down? They're calling this current market right now. I've seen spreads between low and high on 1929 and other major downturns. And this peak is way above those in terms of comparative valuations like price earnings ratios, ratios to GDP, those various ratios. Yeah, it's way out there.
Do you think young people should? So I'm of the opinion, I guess, that young people should invest. Like me and Adam like to, do our research and then just kind of start to invest ourselves. But, there's a lot of danger to that if a lot of people aren't careful. Do you think a lot of young people should invest, or should they invest and then go through another person, like another investor, to help them out with that process? Or do you think it really just comes down to like the research they do behind it?
I started really right away. As soon as I had some extra bucks, like 1975, something like 10 years out of high school. I lost a lot of money just fuddling around with it and trying to figure out what to do. One thing that I found out is that brokers do not want you to know very much, okay? Because they want to be the access to trades. Today, it's a lot different. I've got a Fidelity account and there's no commission on stock trades. And if I want to talk to somebody about how their various mechanisms work, like one of the mechanisms they've got that I still haven't called on. In fact, let me write this down right now. They've got a mechanism where you can say, I will track the stock 10% below. And so if it doesn't fall over 10%, I'm riding all the way to the top with it. But if it does fall 10%, I'm out. Okay, so if your stock's been going up like this, and you want to time the out, that's one way to time it. And it's really a good idea to make it automatic, because if you don't, your emotions will take over.
So
it's down 12. It's down 12%. Well, I still like it. Plus, I'm pretty sure in the next upturn it's going to go up at 2%, and I can get out when it's 10%. And then you go to work and you don't see it all day.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to make it automatic. You got to decide beforehand, what can I afford to lose on this position? And the other thing is, don't fall in love with a position. Don't take one position. Have 5 positions, and don't have 5 positions all in crypto. That's the same position. have a position in crypto, have a position in a bank, have a position in a shoe manufacturer, make it disparate, move around and get it into different industries and so on. Concentrated positions are dangerous.
So here's what I find interesting on Robinhood. When it was going crazy, they just decided, well, you're just not going to buy, and we're only going to have the sell option. That can't be legal. There's no way. Is that legal? I mean, how does that work? I mean, there has to be lawsuits that are going to be filed off of that.
I'm thinking that part of it might have involved the SEC. I really haven't looked into it that far yet. Like I say, they will change the rules. That's the lesson that the Hunt brothers learned.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when they keep raising how much you have to put in cash, that's changing the rules. That's why I don't like government controlling any of my money, like Social Security. That was going to be money set aside. It's not set aside, it's all borrowed out. They spent it on wars and stuff, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Wars that most people don't even agree to.
Yeah. So and they control who runs so that you can't vote for anybody that wants to get out either.
So one last thing for you here, and what is libertarianism to somebody who doesn't know? The idea in itself, not even the party, but the idea of libertarianism.
The core principle is the non-aggression principle, which is, in other words, I can't aggress on you. Okay. So if I'm a politician in a libertarian system, I can't come to you and say, I'm going to force you to pay part of your wages to pay for me. So a libertarian would look for passive means of taxation, like a tax on resources. Let's say that there was a tax on resources across the spectrum of energy. Okay, so now instead of income tax, there'd be a 20% tax on petroleum. Okay, so to replace that income. So now I'd be more Scotch with petroleum. I'd be more willing to ride a bus. I'd be more willing to walk someplace. So it would actually reduce pollution. That isn't what they want, quote unquote, but this is what's best for family. The other thing that there's two things that I'm actually trying to get out there now is we need to make fundamental changes that the Libertarian Party still partakes in. And I want to finish this part about what libertarianism is. It is classical liberal. We do not tell you what you can put in your body. We don't, none of those kinds of things. We don't concern ourselves with individuals that way. We see government as a means to deliver justice, the Supreme Court and all the courts that come through on the bottom of that, along with prisons and so on. And the other is defense of the nation and the borders. And so, the rest of government really would have very little to do with any of us. That this time that we're spending concerned with what's happening in Washington, D.C. is a huge amount of time of human being when you compare it to, let's say, prior to 1913 and below that. People really didn't care about what happened in a distant capital because nothing really affected them that much. So that's the ideal libertarian setting. The other thing about non-aggression principle is that it's fed by the notion of the virtue, and there's about 32 virtues. Some religions have more virtues than that, but they gel down to 32 that I've found anyway. And the virtues are all voluntary. So, for example, no one can force you to be kind to another person. No one can force you to be empathetic with another person. No one can force you to be generous to another person. Government tries to take that role by telling you that I'm going to take your money that you make working and I'm going to give it to the poor people over here. And enough people say, yeah, we should be doing that. Instead of personally doing it, they want the government to go in and do it for them. And the problem is the waste that I just told you about. It ends up costing way more than it would mano a mano, Plus, you miss out on, with doing it that way, you miss out on one of the best virtues out there, and that's gratitude. So no one comes up to you and says, God, man, thanks for paying those taxes. I just got my EMT card, and without you, man, I wouldn't have been able. No one ever did that. Do you remember? And that happened to you? It never happened in my life. In fact, sometimes if somebody has used a government service, I'll say, well, I probably donated the money by my taxes to pay for that for you. And, if you want to say thank you, they don't want to say thank you. They don't want to say thank you, not on that circumstance. So it's not very virtuous. In fact, it's immoral. It's because government represents force, and the virtues are voluntary. So the only way you can reach morality is through the virtues. Those are the building blocks of morality. And when you look at government and all of the things that they're doing that we don't want government to do, for example, helping the Middle East by bombing the hell out of them, that's not virtuous. That's force.
No.
And
the Yemen
so
situation.
I don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah, and something that I tweeted out actually is with libertarianism, or just ideally, it's an existential thing, because I don't think that somebody else should be having to make decisions for me when I can make all those myself. I should be able to be free to do what I want to do, which resonates with young people. But here's what I'll say about young people and libertarianism. The Libertarian Party is just a shit show. I mean, it is. There's like two trains of thought here. I feel like there's a Mises caucus, and then there's this like weird virtue signaling, identity politics side too, and nobody can get along. There's like this Dave Smith, Tom Woods side, and then there's the other side too. And obviously I associate personally with Dave Smith and Tom Woods and Jeff Dice and those guys. But I just think that young people agree with that idea. If we can just get together and genuinely like accomplish what we want, founded on the principles of libertarianism, I think it could pick up steam. So
I agree with you, and I think part of the problem is that the people who are entrenched with government, the sycophants, the beneficiaries, the like Big Pharma, for example, actually got marijuana to be declared a Schedule I drug. Okay, no research can be done on it. That's how audacious it gets. And so these same people are fighting libertarian ideals. I can tell you right here in North Dakota that when I approach a farmer, and I should say when they approach me, I had a farmer approach me and said, "So what would you do with farm subsidies?" I'd say they'd be over. I mean, I'm not going to force somebody to pay tax so that I can, deliver that money to you. And yeah, that's end of discussion. I had a discussion at my house one night about economic development. I invited a neighbor. I won't name him, but turns out that he takes advantage of economic development, buys downtown buildings. And when he heard that libertarians would not tax families to give TIF districts and all kinds of support and money and no property tax for a building downtown, no, we wouldn't want that. Off he went. End of discussion. Because they use that for a tool, and so that's one of the things that bothers me about what's happened during COVID with the destruction of all the capitalism that went on. The last time I heard in November, 110,000 restaurants had gone under. Okay, so now you take 110,000 restaurateurs who do everything incrementally and very carefully, and put them under, okay, I got to take whatever you give me in the federal government, because now I'm beholden to you. And so now I'm going to vote for the things that'll give me more money instead of go out there to earn more money. So that there's been a huge shift. The Democrats are going to be in control for a long time. That's what I'm predicting, because they're going to make 11 million illegal people living in the United States legal citizens. And those people are going to be so grateful to DC for the help all along the way. And now you made us citizens. You granted that to us. We owe you for at least maybe 2-3 generations. That happened after FDR in the 30s. Even though those policies were a disaster in the long run, the people said, hey, you helped us. We're going to be with you for a long time. So Truman got in, stayed in right after that. Johnson came in. So yeah, it's going to be a long while where we're going to be beholden to government. They're going to borrow trillions more. Unfortunately, I look at you young guys and I say to myself, well, we're moving into a feudal system. A feudal system back then was we sharecropped the nobleman's land. Now, instead of land and sharecropping, you're paying interest on an amount of money so high that there's no hope of paying any principal down. And so out of your labor will be the income tax that will pay that tax. And that's going to put a heavy burden on you. If 30 trillion, which is we're almost there now, in cash debt, if that were all of a sudden to go to 3% interest across the board, that's 900 billion a year. The entire defense budget is 740. That's how big that is.
I got one last thought here, and then obviously you guys can add on here. So we're gonna wrap things up here a little bit. I heard Jeff Dice talk about, speaking of taxes and intakes and debt, if we take right now all the policies we have that we have to pay out, and including the taxes we take in the next 50 years, just that alone, we're $200 trillion in debt. That's not payable. That's just simply impossible.
Right.
And then another thing that I'm going to add here is one of my idols growing up, or people I have looked up to, is Ron Paul. And
Okay.
I would just like to add a little nugget here of, for whatever it's worth to people, what I found really inspiring from him is how courageous he was when he'd stand up there and say, I think the Middle Eastern wars are just a bunch of crock. And sometimes he'd get booed or people would, be upset. He didn't care. He just said his stuff. He went home and he went about his day, and it was fine. That was okay with him. He was totally okay with that. But over time, people started to agree with him. We're like, you know what? You're right. So there is power in that. There is an untapped potential that is not being tapped right now.
I'll give you, I'm proud to say that I have a picture with Ron Paul. We were big supporters of him here in Fargo years ago, and 2012 I think was the last time. And anyway, yeah, the one thing that I talked to him a little bit about, and I said, how did you serve in Congress for so long and you had the outlier ideas? And he said, every race, and he ran every 2 years, I wore out 2 or 3 pair of shoes. He said, I knocked on every door. And so what happened was that he convinced his local people using his logic over time, and his rhetoric became so strong that he could say it most emphatically without embarrassment or without, it was easy for him to say. And I've actually used that in business since then. Because I realized that for someone to serve a client or a customer really, really well, they need to learn to say what the customer needs to hear really, really well. And the only way to do that is to do it over and over and over again and develop a spiel that you get positive results from. And that's what door-to-door campaigning does. That's the slight that I did not understand when I was state chair of the Libertarian Party for 8 years. We didn't run anybody. We just developed our philosophy, and here's what and so when people would come, we'd talk about our philosophy and stuff like that. No, you gotta go door to door, and you gotta talk to a family guy and say, does it make any sense for you to spend money to bomb people in the Middle East for years and years and years? And he'll go, of course not. Well, then let's talk. We got something in common, and start there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything's in incremental steps, small little bits to get the movement going.
There it is. It's grassroots. It's grassroots and getting out there. I think the internet does help some. It's easier to provide evidence, for one thing. So when somebody presents something that not to be true, it's easy to put that there and say, well, here's what so-and-so said. Doesn't this make sense? And I think the number one thing that we need to discuss is outcomes. We all want things to happen. We want regenerative energy, for example. But now we're finding out that those windmills have to be buried and they don't decompose. They're made out of fiberglass. So they permanently spoil that soil. You can't use it for any other purpose. And now the solar panels are starting to come off, and they've got heavy metals in them and chemicals and and glass and all that stuff. Where are you going to put those? So there's a balancing effect that is not being observed. The outcome, measuring the outcome, and I would say that's where the libertarian economists really shine through, is that they do study outcomes. Like Thomas Sowell, for example, he goes, okay, let's study the outcome of the welfare program. Well, it used to be that all the dads were at home with the families. Now they're not. Okay, that's an outcome of the welfare program, because if they show up at the house, the welfare stops.
Well,
Stuff
you know
like
what?
that.
Today's common theme does seem to be everything is in increments, and that can be good or bad. It really can, because it's harder to take away things that already happened. So if you make it good, well, then it's harder to take it away. Like, that's a good thing. But whereas if it's a bad thing where you progressed, it's harder to bring that back. And that's
Well,
obviously
in politics, it's really hard.
Mhm.
Yeah, you can't get them to stop it. And especially if we go into full-blown democracy, if they get rid of the electoral college and they flood the United States with Democratic voters, yeah, that's what we're going to have. I want this, and I want equality, and I want, and they start pointing at all these things, and they all start costing a ton of money. And I'd say we're well on our way to a banana republic now. So.
Well, on that note, anyways, yeah, no, crazy week, the stock market, all the stuff. We appreciate you coming on today. It was a great conversation. We'll have to bring you on again to talk politics another time.
Anytime. If you'd like
All
to
right.
get more into the virtues, I'm actually working on hopefully establishing a roundtable to discuss the virtues. One of the things that I found out is that the writers of the Constitution, when they wrote that Constitution and did not put welfare or income tax or any of that stuff into it, their lexicon, their daily conversations involved the virtues. Oh, isn't he compassionate? And did you know that Tom gave Greg $1 million because he can't work for the rest of his life? And those accolades and gratefulness and compassion, generosity, empathy for others, and so on. We don't even vet our candidates that way. We never ask them, well, give us some examples of when you've been compassionate. We don't even vet them that way. So we've got a long ways to go to get that back into the fiber of our society.
You know what? I'll take you up on that circle if you create it. Count me
Okay.
in.
Oh, yeah.
All right, great.
Yeah,
Good to
I
know.
love that stuff. Me and Brandon sit down and talk about virtues and all that stuff. I mean, we could talk about
Hours.
that for days.
For hours. Yeah, we sit
Wonderful.
down for hours.
Yeah.
Good. Oh, I'd love that. Okay, well, send me I guess I've got your contact information, so maybe we should carry on some other time too and just talk about the virtues. I'd like to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we
Okay.
get perspectives from multiple generations, which is also cool as well.
Yes, wonderful.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in today, folks. This is the end of the episode 9 with Marty Riske, and we will see you again next time. Be built different.